Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my one-turn playthrough of Grand Fleet, or one-turn demo, I should say. Now, those of you who know me well know what I'm going to say next. I must apologize to everyone because I messed something up in my previous video in the turn order. Those of you who saw the previous video will remember I rolled at one point to determine if the Russian fleet was going to intervene this turn. What I should have actually rolled for at that time was whether the British are required to send any of their ships away on overseas deployment. Whoops. Now, in the interest of saving time, I'm going to keep the results I rolled for the Russian fleet, but as a courtesy, I'm just going to ask the German player, yes, British player, have you any objection to me keeping the results of the Russian fleet roll, and are you happy to pretend that you never saw them appearing in the Baltic? Yes, answer is yes to both of those, British player. Thank you, German player, you're a decent fellow. So, what I propose to do now, before I do anything else, is roll to see if any British ships are sent overseas. And for this to happen, the British need to roll a 6. So, as you can imagine, with my British hat on, I do not want to roll a 6. And we do not roll a 6. Happy days. Looks like Gallipoli can take care of itself without any more pre-dreadnoughts being fed into the mincing machine. Good stuff. Right, so now then, the next question is, how do we deploy? Because we are now at the start of the movement phase. So in every movement phase, the British and the allies under their control go first, except for the Russians. We'll see how they behave in a minute. The Germans move next, and then the Grand Fleet, if it has been held back by the British, may then make a reaction move. So let's begin with the regular British moves. Now, because of the heavy losses of last turn, the British have a difficult choice that they need to make. Obviously, they have to control some real estate. They depend on that for their points, but which real estate? So they're not going to go into the bite this turn. They learned a very painful lesson last turn in what happens when you go into the bite. But they do want to assert enough control to make the German players sit up and take notice. So what they're going to do is they're going to order the pre-dreadnoughts of the 5th battle group, who have a movement rating of 3. So they're going to go 1, 2, 3, and these fine fellows are going to hold the Dogger Bank. And now the other thing that they're going to do is reinforce them, I think. How are we going to do this? Should I send one group or two? This is where the difficult decision making comes in. No, the 6th battle group will move into the Dover Straits. We want that to be an enticing target, but we don't want it to be overly reinforced. And looking to the base in Ireland, just to make sure we keep a hold on our various spots, I'm going to move the battleship Lord Nelson and the armoured cruiser Defence into the English Channel to cover that waterway. The other 2 armoured cruisers based in Queenstown can move into the southwestern approaches. And I think that could probably be it for the heavy stuff. Now, what about light forces? I'm going to send the Harwich and Sheerness submarines into the Dover Straits as well. Interestingly enough, submarines can conduct anti-U-boat warfare, so that might be something worth doing. I'm I'm also going to send the minesweepers and the submarines from Portsmouth into the English Channel for a similar reason. If the German submarines try something, they'll be able to exert some influence on stopping them. And the same reasons are going to dictate sending the Queenstown submarines into the southwestern approaches. Further north, what have we got at Rosyth? I do have a mine-laying squadron, and I am tempted to send them down to Dogger Bank. So if the Germans do take the bait and move a force into the Dogger Bank, we will be laying mines ready for them. The two submarine flotillas I have up there, I think I will send... This is a difficult decision. That one's rather short-ranged. I might keep them back this turn because they can't really reach any areas where they'd be useful. This slightly longer-ranged one, I might send down to reinforce Dover. So 1, 2, 3, which matches its movement rating. Now, what about my forces up in Scapa Flow? I am going to keep the Grand Fleet and the Battlecruiser Fleet united for now. That lone armoured cruiser I think I will keep in port for now because on its own it can't really do all that much. But I will send the airship scouting division, who have a very impressively long range. I'm going to send them down to patrol off Dogger as well. In fact, come to think of it, let us send both airship units down to Dogger Bank. So what are the Germans going to do to react to this? Now, this is a really good question. And bearing in mind the strategic decision-making the Germans felt they had to make last turn, they do have a number of options. Well, do you know what? The Germans have a bit of a bad feeling about this, so they're actually not going to bite. What they're going to do to see if they can entice the British to their doom again is they're going to send the High Seas Fleet in its glorious entirety into the Heligoland Bight, but they're not going to send it anywhere beyond that. Now, you may wonder at the reasons for that. You know, I did touch in my previous video on the Germans being presented with this glorious opportunity following their defeat of the Grand Fleet last turn to make a god-awful mess. But equally, they're not foolish. It's very tempting to do exactly as the British did last turn and go charging everywhere, trying to grab those victory points. But the Germans are very conscious, albeit this is a bit gamey, that they are leading the British by 7 victory points already. And all they really need to do is maintain that lead. So they're going to send the High Seas Fleet and the scouting group into the Heligoland Bight. Just in case the British are foolish enough to attack them again, there will be extremely heavy Zeppelin reconnaissance. And the Germans are also going to deploy their mine warfare units for local defence. So if the British didn't enjoy the bloody nose they had last time, then they're welcome to try again. The Germans might just... they've got some short-ranged submarines here too, but they think they might keep the shorter-ranged ones back. However, their submarines with a slightly longer range, like that unit with 3, is going to go 1, 2, 3, and head for the channel to engage in a bit of submarine warfare. In fact, let's send 2 flotillas, because there's lots of victory points to be had from bagging British targets. Those 2 have a range of 4, so they're going to move into the English Channel. And that last one has a range of a whopping 5. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to go all the way out to the southwestern approaches and try and attack some merchant shipping over there. Now, what about the Baltic? Now, as the German player, i.e., me, has very kindly decided he's going to forget all about the possibility that those Russians might appear. Um, with my German hat on and pretending none of that happened, there's actually very little reason to not repeat the winning formula of previous turns. The Russians haven't made a move all war. So the Baltic fleet is going to divide into its component pieces so that it can send these different forces out to continue dominating Skagerrak, Kattegat, and the Baltic, anticipating that there'll be no interference from the Russians. And there'll be a nice bit of victory point gathering there to supplement the havoc that their submarines will wreak. While, just to rub it in for the poor British, the high seas fleet will just laugh at their hollow trap and go, ha ha, nothing doing, boys. Sorry, we're just going to stand here and watch, while our ancillary arms win the war for us. So that just leaves the British with the Grand Fleet option. Now, unfortunately for them, the Germans didn't didn't fall for the trap of moving into Dogger Bank. They were a bit too intelligent for that. So what the Grand Fleet will do, however, just to wipe a bit of the smirk off German faces, is to send the Grand Fleet and the battlecruiser fleet into the North Sea. Now, because the Germans haven't contested it, this is quite a nice move. They can just sweep in and lay claim to it later. And because the Germans get no more movement opportunities, that is a nice, safe thing that the British can do with their reconstituted fleet. So, right, and now, of course, we would have fatefully, at this point, rolled to see whether the Russians did anything. And as we know, they do. So, much to the horror of the Germans, the hitherto quiet Baltic suddenly fills up with Russians who decide they're going to have a go anyway. So there will, in fact, be a battle in the Baltic, even though the North Sea is going to be relatively quiet. So let's move on to that, because the really meaty part of this game is the combat sequence. So we've somehow contrived to have no major sea actions, probably because both sides, the main protagonists, don't really feel they either want or can afford one this turn. But we do have an action in the Baltic. So we're going to begin. The first thing you check is the mine warfare element. Now, the German Baltic fleet is only represented by its Group G, and they have not brought any mine layers with them. The Russians, unluckily for the Germans, have brought one mine layer. So the Russians get to roll a dice and potentially inflict some mine losses on the Germans. So yes, the Russians roll one dice because they have one mine layer, and they roll, while the German holds his breath, a 1. Okay, there is only a single mine strike on a single German ship. That's very lucky for Group G. Now, the Baltic Fleet's Group G consists of 4 old pre-dreadnought battleships and a destroyer flotilla. So we have to randomize to see who gets hit. On a 1, 2, or 3, it's going to be vessels in the German screen. On a 4, 5, or 6, it's going to be the battle line. I'll just turn this round so you can see which group I'm talking about. So screen, battle line, and the German roll is... Ooh, a mine has found something in the battle line. Okay, now it's a bit awkward. We've got 4 ships there. So I'm going to do another 1, 2, 3. It's the first 2, or one of the first 2. 4, 5, 6. It's the second of them. First pair, 1, 2, 3, lead ship. 4, 5, 6, second ship. It's the second ship. So the poor old SMS Siegfried is bimbling along minding its own business when suddenly it whams into a Russian mine. And this is the mine damage table it now has to roll on. And they have just rolled a 3. So that's 3 hits from the mine. Now, unfortunately for the Siegfried, as you can see, she only has 1 hull strength point. So the Russian mine goes up with a very satisfying boom, and the poor Siegfried rolls over and sinks. That's the conclusion of the mine warfare segment. Now we move on to the search resolution. Now this is an important one because it's all down to how many reconnaissance assets both sides have. Neither side has any airships present. Independent units in the zone, i.e. the Russian mine warfare units, don't have any inherent search value. But the Russian screen does, and each one has a value. So submarine flotillas are worth 3. So that's 3, 6. Everyone else is worth 1. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the Russians have 11 reconnaissance points. The German Group G only has a single destroyer flotilla, so they only have 1. Now, this huge preponderance in scouting assets means that the Russians can count how many capital units are inside the German battle line. Now, bearing in mind, if we were playing a proper game between 2 live opponents, everything would have been face down, so the Russians would only have been told that there's 3 heavy units. Now they're feeling pretty confident because they've not only got a huge screen, they've brought along 3 dreadnoughts, and they've also brought along the old pre-dreadnought battleship Slava for a good measure. Now, although they know the Germans have reorganized, they have a pretty shrewd idea based on previous German behavior that a lot of the German strength is over that away, guarding the Heligoland Bight. So they're going to commit to an action. And what we do now is we move on to the question of whether the Russians wish to disengage. We've covered that. Nope, they want to go in. So now we have a battle between the opposing side's screening unit. Each screening unit rolls a dice. And on a 6, it sinks one of the enemy screening units. On a 5, it disables or disperses it. So because the Russians have 7 units, they get to roll 7 dice. Ouch, the poor Germans. So the Russians charge in. I see some 6s, so that poor German destroyer flotilla never knew what hit it. But it does get to shoot back before its demise. Unfortunately, the Russians got the drop on them, so the German flotilla goes under. And because the German units now no longer have a screen, we go straight to what's called battle line combat. So I'm going to bring us here. Apologies for the angle. My table was simply not big enough, so we're going to have to watch the battle with the battle board aligned somewhat differently. So in order to place your ships for a naval battle, you have you form them up in line ahead. And as you can see from this red arrow over here, you are allowed to trail off the battle map. In fact, it's pretty much expected that you will most of the time. The Russians, unsurprisingly, are going to devote a dreadnought each to their German victims. And the Slava, because she's an extra ship, is going to double up behind the Sevastopol and help her pick on the Beowulf. And this is where those who are very familiar with the war at sea system will know exactly what's going to happen next. Combat is considered to be simultaneous. So the Russian, I'll just roll for the Russians and the Germans together. I'll use blue dice for Russians. So a total of 5 because the Sevastopol and the Slava are targeting the Beowulf. The Beowulf cannot target the Slava in return. She has to target the main ship in the first line. So that would be the Sevastopol. So both sides are only interested in 5s or 6s. Okay, the German fire is ineffective. The Russians have 1-5 and 1-6. So if the Beowulf is somehow still afloat after she takes the damage, she'll be disabled. So the Russians roll for damage and they get a 6. No, the poor Beowulf is blown out of the water. And so now we move to the next ship, the Poltava versus the Odin. And I'll do the dice together again as I did before. Ooh, poor Odin. 2 disables for the Russians and a hit. So let's see how much damage is done. Yep, the poor Odin goes the same way, unsurprisingly, as the Beowulf. And lastly, Petropavlovsk versus Fritjof. Oh, ouch. Okay. No damage to the Russians. And the let me re-roll that. And they do 5 damage points to the Fritjof, which is well above what she was designed to take. So the Russians completely wipe out the German battle group G of the Baltic fleet, which is a bit of a blow because what it means is that I'll just turn the camera back up. So that combat group has basically evaporated. And it means for the first time since the commencement of hostilities, the Germans have lost control of the Baltic. That's not going to be fun for them afterwards when we tot up points. Now, had any of the Germans survived that first round of combat, there were various options by which they could have tried to disengage and run. But it would have been very hard for these old pre-dreadnought coastal defense battleships because their speed is only 2. And the very slowest of their Russian antagonists have a speed of 3. So I'm afraid really the Russian fleet very convincingly ran down and obliterated the opposition there. A very timely warning as far as the British are concerned because they need the Germans to be distracted by events elsewhere. So we've done the main combat between fleets, in which, as we've seen, there was only 1 battle this turn. So now we move on from the combat phase into the area control and victory points phase. Now, you'll notice we haven't covered the anti-commerce warfare yet. That bit comes a little bit later, but we'll just do the points counting for now. So starting with the western edge of the map and moving across, nobody controls these, so they remain neutral. The British have got some ships here. Neither side has a major fleet or a battle group in the southwestern approaches, but the British do have 2 major units there, the 2 armoured cruisers, so they retain control of that area. Same story here. The British have the Lord Nelson and the Defence backing up the smaller flotillas, so they keep that. The entire 6th battle group is here, so the Dover Straits are still British. Dogger Bank is being held by the 5th battle group. The Long 40s remain untenanted. Sorry. Now, the Hebrides Shelf, I could have sent that lone armoured cruiser up there, but 1 independent heavy ship is not enough to secure an area, so the British unfortunately lose control of that space. However, they do retain their control of the North Sea because it's uncontested by the German High Seas Fleet. Nobody holds the Norwegian Sea. The Germans definitely control Heligoland Bight, and they hold Skagerrak, Kattegat. But happily for the Allies, the Russians have converted control of the Baltic to the Entente powers. So that's a bit of an upset for the Germans. So what does this mean in terms of points? The British and the Russians between them have managed to gather 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's pretty good. So the balance of victory points has swung in favour of the British, really. They are leading by 5 now. But we now have to add up the German victory points, which come to 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. So after that, the Germans are left with a 2 victory point lead, which is going to be beefed up even further because we now come to the anti-shipping warfare phase. Boo. So in each area where there's an anti-shipping element, the first thing you check is whether German defences wipe out independent Allied submarines. But to do this, the Germans need mine layers and minesweepers. Now, as we've seen, all the available German mine warfare vessels were concentrated in the Heligoland Bight, and there are no Entente submarines there, so we just skip that step. The next bit is British units primarily get to have a crack at any German submarines. So British destroyers, minesweepers, mine layers, and other submarines and airships can attack German subs. So looking at the areas that are being infested by German submarines, let's move across. So we have one submarine flotilla in the southwestern approaches, and there's a German one, so the British can roll to attack. They only take effect if they roll a 5 because they're a submarine unit. Only destroyers can actually wipe out sub-flotillas. But on a 5, the Brits will disable them and send them back to port. Nope, they fail miserably, so the Germans are still there. And what that means is the Germans, for that flotilla, score a victory point for successfully remaining on station and attacking British merchant vessels. How about the English Channel? The Brits have got a minesweeper unit and a submarine unit there. So each can roll 1 dice, but they need 5s, and there's 2 German flotillas there. The Brits will have to get very lucky indeed. Oh, they do disable one of them, so it's forced to return to port without attacking. But the Germans still get 1 victory point for that one. And lastly, the Dover Straits. Again, the British have got 2 submarine units versus 2 German sub-flotillas. A double 5 would be really nice, chaps. No dice, literally. So in this case, the Germans score 2 victory points. Now, there is a limit on the pain the British go through. You can never, as the German player, score more than 2 victory points for this kind of anti-shipping operations. But the picture is still not good because after all that effort, the Germans, now that we've totted up the points, are still leading by 6 points, which is a pretty decent lead. So with the anti-shipping warfare phase done, the next stage is returning to port. So this is quite an easy one. Most people will return to the ports that it's best to have everyone return to a port from which you want them to sortie within a reasonable range. Sorry, I really jumbled that sentence. Basically, park your ship somewhere where it's easy for them to get where they're going next turn. So, Lord Nelson and Defence will actually go back to Queenstown for now. It's quite useful having them there. I might keep the various British submarine flotillas down here at Portsmouth and Harwich and Sheerness. The I think I'll swap the British battle groups around though. The slower British 6th battle group can go to Harwich. The somewhat faster 5th can go back to Portsmouth. These various German submarine flotillas can go home to their bases. These units can return to, I think I'll send everything to Rosyth. And the British Grand Fleet and the battlecruiser force can return to Scapa Flow. The Germans' various units will come straight back to Wilhelmshaven. And the surviving elements of the Baltic fleet will fall back to Kiel. For the Russians, their job is done for this turn. They will depart, so they go off map completely, and they will disappear again unless a lucky dice roll on the part of the British brings them back the following turn. The final step, of course, is repairs. Now, the Allied units have suffered no damaged ships this turn, and neither have the Germans because all the ones that they had engaged were sunk. But they have leftover damaged ships from the action of the previous turn. Now, each port has a rating that is both its capacity and its maximum repair ability. So with only 3 damage points on 2 dreadnoughts, Wilhelmshaven easily fixes up the Rhineland and the Westfalen, meaning that come the organisation phase of next turn, they will both be ready to rejoin the High Seas Fleet again. And that brings us to the end of the turn. The very next bit would be the start of turn 4. So there we go. That is a single turn of Grand Fleet. If you're wondering why there wasn't a whole series of naval battles, this game actually does slightly discourage that approach. As the British learned the previous turn, your battleships, your dreadnoughts particularly, are the authority that underpins everything your fleets do. And you need to keep that asset intact as long as you can. So very often, especially with the fog of war in this game, there'll be lots of maneuvering and groping around in the dark and trying to get little advantages here and there. And you don't really apply the sledgehammer all that frequently unless both sides feel the conditions are right. And that can be pretty rare. So I'd say on the whole, that was a fairly representative turn, slightly coloured by the reality of British weakness. But I hope that you found that interesting and useful, particularly if you're umming and ahhing as to whether it's worth getting this game. I have probably failed to mention a whole load of things, and as I say, this is the basic rules being showcased. There are quite a lot of really well-considered advanced rules that make this fairly basic approach to the history of this this theatre of war in World War One much more realistic if you choose to add them at the cost of increased gameplay time. So if you do have any queries, observations, comments, or anything at all that you'd like to make about the 2 videos I've put up today, then please do put them down and I will respond to you as soon as I can. But otherwise, it just remains for me to say thank you all again for watching this. I really appreciate your company and your engagement. It's so great when you guys sort of leave all these sparkling comments, queries, and I love getting back to you, even when you point out where I've inevitably slipped up, because as you know, I do that a lot. Um, so, yes, thank you so much to my long suffering veterans. A big hello. Always awesome to see you guys. If you're new to my channel, then you're very, very welcome. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If it's Grand Fleet that brought you here, please check out the other ones, or if it's wargaming in general, you're more than welcome. But whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Bye.